everybody, and welcome to the first ever video broadcast of Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim, and we are broadcasting from my upstairs closet, which is our fancy studio. And this is, of course, Coffin Talk, interviews with the living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week we have Ellen Sickenberger on. She's a professional dance artist currently based in Phoenix, Arizona, with roots in the Northeast. She spent many years working as a freelance artist in New York City and abroad in the Middle East, where she performed and toured with various contemporary dance companies and presented work as a choreographer. She currently works as an arts coordinator and continues to develop her company, Depth Dance. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. And we're, of course, in Phoenix, so it's nice to have someone local always. And I don't know if you had a chance to listen to our show, but we always ask our guests, how old are you? Where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Sure, I'm 33 years old. I grew up in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC, from a place called Reston, Virginia. And I definitely am a millennial through and through, for sure.
Awesome. I have a lot of friends from the Reston, like DC area. I went to Pitt, so
Oh,
for some reason, a ton
oh,
of kids from
nice.
like Silver Springs, Bethesda, that whole like area. Um,
Yeah, the whole DMV area. I love
yeah,
that.
exactly.
I
So
loved
that's
growing
cool.
up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I grew up in California, so I'm not actually from Phoenix either. When did you get here to Phoenix?
I actually just moved here a little under 3 years ago. And that was pretty much after a 10-year career in the freelance dance world, contemporary dance world. And then I kind of turned 30 and I was like, I'm ready for healthcare and a salary. And so I moved here to step into the arts coordinating role as mentioned in the little bio. So yeah, I've been here just under 3 years, loving the dry heat,
Yeah.
honestly.
No, that's cool. And I did a similar thing. Like I went and got an MFA in my late 20s, early 30s, and kind of same deal. The arts and entertainment business is a business, and you need healthcare and all that stuff. So good on you.
Exactly.
And I'm
Thank you.
curious, which parts of the Middle East were you in? Like all over, or any specific countries?
I was specifically in Israel,
Oh,
actually,
cool.
which is, I feel like that's a touchy even country to say right now because of all the things going on. But, I was just there working with the dance company, living my dream. I had an amazing experience while I was there. So, yeah, it was extremely eye-opening to be
That's cool.
in living in that part of the world. Yeah, it was really
Yeah,
awesome.
I am an apolitical Jew who has never been to Israel, but I am just saddened by like everything that is violent in our world. So it doesn't matter. I take the side of this is horrible, but I am curious when you like see clips or if you happen to like catch the news, do you like see places that have like real memories for you, and is that difficult?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I was living just below Tel Aviv in a place called Rishon LeZion, very close to Tel Aviv. And I have a lot of friends that were directly affected by the bombings. I even know like a couple people who passed from it. And actually, while I was there, there was about a 6-day bomb threat that, not even bomb threat, I'm sorry, just like straight up bombs being sent over. So it was like 6 straight days of like any hour of the day that the alarms outside would just go off. And every building in Israel has to have a bomb shelter in it for obvious reasons. So it was like 6 days of just any time of the day or night that I might have to, go down the stairs in the bomb shelter. So it was just crazy to actually like live a very mild version of that. And then obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, but I left before any of this current war started.
Hmm.
But it's been brewing for years. But yeah, it's just really hard to have conversations with my friends, and it it just affects me so much more personally. And it's really hard to hear, Americans talk about these issues who don't actually have any idea. They're just being fed by what the very polarized media is telling them, and it's just I think that's the hardest part about it is it's really hard to see people as humans when you're getting fed media. But yeah, so
I
it's
totally
it's been
agree. I
hard.
mean, yeah, I when I was much younger, I was a teacher and I got flown to England a lot for my company, and it would never cease to shock me when I would turn on the BBC and they would refer to everything in the Middle East the complete opposite perspective as American media. And so to this day,
Yeah.
I just am aware that like every culture just gobbles up what the top-down messaging is, and it's really hard to escape that, even with like YouTube and a million independent people. But I think, kind of bringing us to the subject of coffin talk, that's kind of my point in like talking about the one universal connector, which is we all got to go. And I
We're
think,
all gonna die.
yeah, and I somehow feel like that actually can bring peace to people, and like if you have a short enough time, most people aren't mean anymore. There's famous stories of people who like get the proverbial like cancer scare, and it just makes them a kinder person. So who
For
knows?
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was actually just talking about death with a friend last night. Or actually he was asking how I felt like if I had a choice to be like immortal, would I? And I was like, absolutely not, like I love living and life is beautiful, but like I think what makes it beautiful is the fact that it's inevitable that we'll die, you know what I mean? And like humans just it's human nature to take things for granted. And as much as I feel like I'm a grateful person and can appreciate everything that life has to offer, I know that I'm still a human with this psychological pattern of, if you have something for too long, you're going to automatically take it for granted. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what makes life/death beautiful is that it is just like a short amount of time. So you have to make the most of it.
yeah. Were you raised like religiously? Did your parents like bring you up with a vision of the afterlife or anything?
No, not necessarily. I went to church as a kid growing up. It's actually weird. I kind of forget about this sometimes. My grandpa, my one grandpa who's still alive, was a pastor. And so for that reason, like my mom grew up like going to church a lot, and that's why I went to church growing up a lot. But it was when you think of like you have a grandpa or like a relative who's a pastor, you just assume that they're like always talking about God and they're like, but
Yeah,
like I've never even heard him say anything to any of his family members of like, you should go to church. I feel like I never even hear him say the word God. Like he's very like to himself with his religion. So even though that's like in my bloodline, it was like not pushed onto me at all, which I really appreciate. Again, I grew up going to church, but when me and my brother got to a certain age and we were like, we don't really want to go to church anymore, my mom was like, that's totally fine. So I have a great, relationship with it. And I think like my parents aren't super religious. They just, they appreciate like the morals of religion, but not so much like following, the organized religion type of thing.
yeah.
But I feel like a lot of my outlooks on the afterlife and my spirituality very much came from dance and my connection to dance and learning various movement methods and like my connection to energy, I think, is and my own kind of practices is kind of how I've shaped my own opinion of what I think exists in the afterlife or whatever.
That is awesome. You just made my job so much easier. You just like literally outlined question by question what I can ask you to like get to the bottom of all this. So that was incredible. Thank you. Normally I have to like dig
Sweet,
a
no
little bit.
problem.
Yeah. So let's start with now and then maybe we'll work in reverse. But if you were to suddenly face death right now, what do you think is going to happen to you right after you die? Or as you die, if you prefer.
Um, well, that's funny because I didn't think I had a different answer, but I'm like, if I died right now, maybe it depends on how I die. I also
Yeah.
like, I love listening to like ghost stories, like real people's accounts of ghost stories and things like that. So I feel like that's kind of like influencing me right now. I do think that like if I was murdered, say, I feel like if I died in an unjust way, I think that my afterlife would be different than if I died in a natural way. So that's the
Wow.
first thing I'll say. But I think in general, I think in general, I believe that it's kind of like the concept of refraction. So it's like we exist in this vessel, but like we carry an energy and like a soul with us. And it's a matter of physics that energy never dies. And so I believe that even if the medium deceases, aka our body, even if our body deceases, I do believe that the energy we carried with us continues on, just without like a form or, without any of the other human constructs.
So, do you believe that the mental part of you, the part that's observing and thinking, is physical? And is that included in that physical shell?
That's a good question, and I'm really not sure. I've also been listening to a lot of well, I guess not a lot, but a specific podcast about this idea of like consciousness that already exists, because it is a belief that the human is what develops the consciousness, but there's like other studies that have come out about like consciousness already existing, and then we just are able to like tap into it. So, I'm not quite sure about that, because like if you die, do you still have the same thoughts? I don't know. Or like are those thoughts still around, like in this universal consciousness that exists? Maybe. I think that could be a thing, but
Well,
I'm
let's
not sure.
let's
I don't have a definitive about that.
when you said something that no guest has ever said before, which is always awesome. So your guest 208, and you said for the first time anyone on our show has ever said that the way you die might have to do with what happens when you die. And I'm totally intrigued by that because that's not the same thing as karma, which is to say previous other lives affect what's going on now. Um, do you also think that in addition to the way you die, what you did in your life would also play into that, or is it really just the way you die? In this thought experiment.
Hmm. Yeah, I think in that scenario for sure. Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to energy, like what you put out on the earth. I don't believe in like a heaven or hell, but I
Mhm.
do believe that like what you put out while you're on the earth can definitely kind of like affect, I guess, what's there in the afterlife.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so with this, by the way, all your answers are awesome, and we're definitely vibing on this. Like, what is consciousness? Is it from inside out, or is it outside and I'm tapped in? Am I a radio receiver? Is there one consciousness? Is there collective? I'm kind of curious. Have you ever had any moments in your life where you felt like someone was reading your thoughts or you were reading theirs? Do you ever have like uncanny things like that?
I wouldn't say like I've had moments where I'm like, whoa, you just read my mind exactly. But there's definitely been a lot of those universal like aligned moments. It's like, oh, I was just thinking about you, like when you texted me or something
Yeah.
like that. Like, we had the same idea of like doing the same activity. Like we knew we were going to hang out tonight and we had the same idea. Like, and I think that, the cynic in me would say that's just coincidence, but the spiritual side of me would say like that is part of that kind of like consciousness or like whatever the energetic plane that when people are connected and when they're truly present can connect to. And I've actually the podcast that this is reminding me of this topic, it's called I'm sorry to plug another podcast
No,
while
no,
we're
please, by
on
all
yours,
means, no, go for it.
but
I'm actually probably
it's
going to
called
download it when we're done.
It's so interesting. It's called The Telepathy Tapes by Kai Dickens,
Cool.
and it's actually talking about non-speakers, meaning autistic people who are nonverbal. And it's like this whole series that dives into this concept of telepathy and how there's been like multiple studies of different cases all around the world of like these non-speakers are telepathic and they I feel like I don't want to go off the wall with it, but like
No,
there's
no,
even
it's
this
cool.
place called there's this place that they call the Hill, which is basically like a mental field where they all meet up and like talk telepathically, even if they're like living in different countries or something like that. And I think like listening to the podcast will do a much better job of, you know, relaying this information than I will, especially because it sounds so outlandish when I just try to describe it in like a few sentences. But I think that lately has just really kind of shifted my opinion about this like universal consciousness that has already like been existing that we can tap into rather than us being the creators of it.
Cool. I have one other friend, and she's a little older than me. I think she's like 34, 35, and she is also a professional dancer. And my second kid, my oldest daughter of my two daughters, has expressed a lot of interest in ballet and dancing. So I'm like suddenly a fan of dancing. I'm like really into it. I'm like trying to get geared
Nice.
up for this life. So as much as I want to turn this into a parenting podcast and ask you a million questions about ballet and whether it's dangerous or not, I'm more curious about the evolution of your awareness that you're a dancer because one, even in the DMV, it's not exactly like every parent's dream come true when their kid says, like me, I want to be a writer, or you, I want to be a dancer. So I'm just kind of curious how all that happened and how you feel. And also, you said it really applies to your metaphysical views. So I'm really curious about that too.
For sure. That's so funny. I definitely got lucky with my parents. They were super supportive, but I
Cool.
pretty much like came out of the womb dancing. Like when I
Awesome.
was before I could walk, I was just like, there'd be like live music playing at a restaurant as a toddler, and I would just be like performing for everyone, like I feel like it was just like in my blood, although I don't have any relatives who dance, so I don't know. I was just waiting. But yeah, I started dance classes at the age of 2 and then like never stopped. And I did what a lot of kids who start dance do, which is just like I started in a studio. I actually started at a community center first, and I think it was like babies tap class or something like that. I don't really remember,
Oof.
honestly. I was so young. And then when I was clearly gonna continue with dance, I was around 6 when I got into a studio and I started taking more classes. Like I was taking like jazz and lyrical and still tap and hip hop. I actually like really had an aversion to ballet. I didn't like it. I thought it was boring. But I got to a certain level. I got to a certain level with my other dance classes that where they told me that I needed to be in ballet so that I could have that technique, which, you know, I have mixed opinions about that. That would send me down a rabbit hole, kind of like you said about talking about like ballet as like a culture. That's
Hmm.
like a whole separate topic, I feel like. Um, but yeah, so I just continued and just slowly grew more and more studio classes. I actually was mainly doing gymnastics. That was my main focus, and I was actually really good at it. I was like winning national awards and crazy stuff like
Wow.
that. And it ended up permanently damaging my bones, and so I ended up being forced to quit. The doctors, were just like, "Yeah, mom and dad, you should tell her that she needs to quit because like there's no other solution to fixing these jagged growth plates." So that happened at age 13.
Uh,
So yeah, compared to gymnastics, ballet, totally safe.
you
Um,
like my wife and I have not had this argument yet, but I think we're never gonna have it based on what you just said. Because that's like I respect gymnastics. Her sister, my wife's sister, did it, and she didn't achieve the same point you did, but similar enough that yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. If you get
So,
to a certain point with gymnastics, you're serious about it. I was like, what, 10 years old doing like 4-hour training sessions 4 days a week, just like so ripped and so skinny at the same time. It's like the hardest sport on your body, just
yeah.
pounding. And so permanently damaged bones. And so
Oh,
really after I quit that is when my focus really shifted to dance. And I went like, starting around high school, first of all, I grew a foot after I quit gymnastics because it was stunting my growth. And I got way more serious about dance at that point in time. And then I was like on my high school dance team and taking multiple studio classes. I was just dancing all the time. And then it got to a point where one day in the car with my mom, I think it was my senior year of high school, probably, I was like, I think I want to major in dance, thinking it was going to be, a scary situation of her being like, no, you should do something more practical. And she just literally was like, okay.
oh, that's
And
cool.
that was pretty much it. And I feel like, a big reason why I'm here today after completing a 4-year degree in dance and then after that having a 10-year career in dance, I really attribute a lot of that to my parents being supportive, especially when like all of society is not supportive. Even my
Mhm.
extended family every Christmas, they'd be like, "So what are you really doing?"
Yeah, yeah.
Or like, "How are you going to make money?" Um, so yeah, it was really around college that I started to get like a deeper understanding of everything of life. I like my
Mhm.
frontal cortex was fully developing, and I had an awareness of others and the universe and my body, and had some really amazing professors. Just little things like learning improvisation um, or, walking around campus and like seeing dance everywhere. Everything is dance. And so it was like all these workshops and amazing teachers that kind of helped integrate like the art of dance more so than just loving to move and loving to perform. And I think that's where it really started for me. And when it got even deeper was in my career. I performed for various companies in New York City, and some of them were bigger names than others. But the one that I toured around the world with and that like deeply impacted me. It was called Nadine Bomer Dance Company. She's an Israeli choreographer who then started a second company in New York City, which is how I started working with her. And she has this movement method called Kinetica, which is all about connecting to the energetic plane and like letting that move you. And it's so
Wow.
much deeper than that. It's a very like complex, layered movement method that I can't really describe in, one sitting. It's extremely detailed and very layered, but that's like the basic um, principle of it. And it was from that moment on that I started to feel extremely connected to energy, and seeing my body as like this vessel. And, that's what helped me release kind of like locks on my brain. So it helped me kind of separate like what is my brain telling me I'm restricted to do or can and can't do versus what's true in like the world, or if I let that go. It was almost like extreme movement meditation. And when you get to that point and you understand the method, you understand how to make your body available so that you don't hurt yourself. But when you get to that level, I mean, it's like your body can do things that your brain doesn't even think it could do.
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
That's eventually how I ended up in Israel working full time with her company and teaching her movement method to other dancers that came from
Oh,
around the
cool.
world to learn it and stuff. So,
I found because I'm a professional writer, but I was and am still a professional educator. And it's like hard to explain to some people, but like I almost love teaching more than I love performing. Like it's like weird. Are you in the same boat? Yeah, I kind of figured.
oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, because it's almost this like you could use the concept of kinetica, right? This idea of like connecting truthfully to the energy, to the present moment. You can apply that methodology to anything in your life. It doesn't have to be movement. It's about like how are you truly present in the moment without judgment, without jumping to the next thing, without holding on too tight of one thing, but really being present of like what is here, when is it supposed to move on, what's needed in the space. And I use that method when I teach too. I feel the energy of the room, like what do I
Oh,
feel
cool.
is needed, what verbal cues are coming out naturally.
Mhm.
It could even be applied in a conversation, right? Because like if you're thinking about talking, it's going to come
Mhm.
out really weird. But if you're just like in the present moment and you're listening to the other person, it's like a give and take, and it just flows. It's like the same
Yeah.
concept as kinetic.
Wow, that's really, really cool. And I kind of want to, before I forget, to ask you about the actual project that made me aware of you. So here locally in Phoenix, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as an arts coordinator, I work at Ednavile Arts Center, which is in the Tempe Library Complex. And the library put on this event called One Tempe, One Book, where they let everyone pick up this book for free. They have like they pick a topic, and then they have like three different books for different age groups. So there was like a kids, a teenagers, and an adult book, but all of them were with the theme of death. And for this program that they do, it's always like a taboo topic, which is I love that they do that. So with this whole month, it was October. So with the whole month of One Tempe, One Book, everyone reads whatever book about death, depending on your age. And then they also host just like a series of all different types of workshops throughout October that relate to death, basically, or the topic of death. And so they reached out to our center being like, are there any types of arts classes or anything like that? And it just felt like a good fit with my energetic background, especially like as a dancer with a physical, awareness of my physical human body. It just made sense to teach a workshop in relation to death. And so that's kind of what I focused on in that workshop. I used all of my knowledge about like understanding this vessel, and connecting to like the energetic plane, but then also in a more literal sense, we talked about like what does it like feel like to have a human body, like just giving people who don't normally dance an hour to become aware of like feel your toes right now, feel your feet, feel your like right like feel everything, and then also how to like physically carry or support like lifeless bodies. So there was many kind of different layers that I used in this workshop, but that's essentially how that all came about. It was a very serendipitous time.
That's really cool. And you struck like a phrase that is kind of the mission of this podcast, which is just to give you the quick background. I used to work in hospice, and I became very quickly aware that the average American is not only not prepared for death, but actually like puts up a stiff arm of resistance against it and really like tries to avoid it and use the phrase taboo. And I believe that is why this happens, is it's taboo in this ultra like material society where you're supposed to want more and more and more and more, not to talk about what eventually is going to prevent that from lasting. So that's my personal theory.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, like, did you find that it was really taboo? Like, were there people there who were like, "Ooh, I can't do this," or was it actually like pretty welcome?
It was welcomed, and I think that's because like the people who showed up to the workshop were like so ready to talk about that topic, which was amazing. One person who showed up to the workshop works in a morgue, and so it was really interesting to just hear from her. She was just completely talking about like everything. I wish I could even like relay some of the stuff, but it was just so interesting to hear her perspective and just talk about human bodies and like dead human bodies in a very like matter of fact kind of way, and just like, you know, how interested she was in the inner workings of the body and like what happens when it dies and things like this. So yeah, it was very welcomed in the space, which was really nice to like, you know, before we even get into moving and talking about bodies, we talked about experiences with death and you know, opinions, I guess, about it. So yeah, it was really nice, and I think that was the whole purpose of Tempe Library's program. So I think even though there weren't people in the space that were resistant that we got to turn over to the other side, it was still this like place where it could be talked about amongst people who, you know, were willing to talk about it, I guess.
And what about I'm going to try to tie two things in. Very early in the podcast you mentioned your peer group and talking about, for lack of a better word, politics, although I don't really think Israel Palestine is politics, but you know what I mean. Um
Right.
and then you also mentioned, of course, living in Israel and actually knowing people who have passed and being in a country that I think is probably not thinking death is taboo per se, because it's actually like on maybe not the forefront but near the front of the mind. I am curious, like, do you think they're better off not for being in a dangerous area with missiles, pointed at them and stuff, but do you think they live life differently with that like awareness?
That's such a good question, and I really think they do, and you feel it when you're there. You know, Americans call it chutzpah or whatever, but like you you feel it when you're there. The warmth, like I met the most amazing people there, and it's like they just seem like such happy-go-lucky people, even though their history is completely tragic and pretty much all the time there's like this conflict that's staring them in the face. But 100% like the way that they live is like so joyful, you know, just like making jokes all the time. So it is really interesting. It's like extremely warm, and I do feel like they appreciate life and live life a lot differently. Granted, it's like I feel like, you know, the whole country is on an ocean, and I'm like, I mean, who wouldn't be happy in that scenario? But I do think it has a lot to do with like their past and how like resilient they are, and their current circumstance that makes them. I just feel like they have an appreciation for life a lot more too. But that being said, you know, it's funny because they come off as very aggressive sometimes just in the way that they talk.
Yeah.
But you know, I found it just so endearing by the end of my time there. And I actually learned Hebrew while I was there, and I love like using their same kind of demeanor when they talk. It's very just like, okay, get to the point. Like what? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
cool.
life is short. Life is short. We got to get to the point.
Yeah. And I don't think living near an ocean makes you necessarily happy, because I'm from Berkeley, Bay Area, and some of the most miserable people I know in my entire life live and exist next to an ocean. So,
That's
and
so true.
meanwhile,
And like
yeah.
from
Oh,
the
I
East
was gonna say,
Coast too.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But here we are in a desert where, oddly enough, people actually seem a lot happier. I don't know if you've noticed that in Phoenix. It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think like I've noticed a similar amount of angry slash happy people in various
Okay,
places of
fair enough. Yeah.
America.
Yeah, what is it like for you, like reporting back to the front lines? Because I know when I moved to Arizona, and it was not at all for any reason except saving money. It was just like my parents are here and but
Nice.
a lot of my friends were like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And this was in like early 2016, so before the first of the three elections that have completely like blown up our culture. But but it was
Yeah.
like weird to like watch people like they're like, you live in a purple state, blah blah blah. Like, do you get that same kind of stuff? Like, yeah, yeah.
For sure, especially like because right before I don't even know if I said this, but like pretty much my whole freelance career in dance was in New York City. So after
Oh,
college, I moved to New York and I lived there for like mo pretty much my whole 20s. I was there for like 7 years. And then I went to Israel for 2 years and then I came here. So my last
okay.
place in America before Arizona was New York City. And so
Yes.
especially coming from like liberal bubble New York,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of my friends were like, why the hell would you do that? But I mean, again, I feel like living in Israel and outside of America completely shifted my perspective on just like, just the puppets that we are to media. And so that kind of helped a little bit, but also like I got a taste of the dry desert climate while I was in Israel, and
Ah,
it did
yeah.
me really like my asthma went away while I was there. I was getting sunshine all the time. And granted, I was dancing 40 hours a week, but I was just like so much healthier. And so um, I knew that I couldn't move back to New York. Like once I was out of New York, I knew that I couldn't move back there. So I used like a job to take me here. And I definitely don't regret it. I mean, I love my job so much, but and I also love the climate, but I definitely get that a lot from my New York friends, like why would you go there? And it's weird to like rep Arizona, but it's also
Yeah.
like you guys aren't doing anything by living in New York. Like, you guys just are going to continue living in a liberal bubble. You know what I mean? But, like, if we really want change, we need people to move to, you know,
Everywhere.
states
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So you're welcome. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Well, and it's
welcome
funny because
as the very moderate.
like less than 50% of Americans own a passport, and even less will ever leave the actual like 48 states, not even like Alaska or Hawaii. And I think while I
Whoa, that's a
respect
crazy
and
stat.
understand everyone's, approach to life, what happened to you is exactly what happened to me when I started traveling when I was young, which is just like makes it impossible to hear monolithic views and not like pretty much laugh, just like, yeah, well, okay, like in our like little bubble,
Yeah,
of course that feels true. So that's really cool. And it's cool the
right.
way
Yeah.
dance shaped your life and you shaped dancing in your life. Like it's fun to watch. I mean, it's a such a cheesy cliche metaphor, but the dance of the two and how it brought you here. So I really have
Yeah.
enjoyed our interview, and I'm like very impressed by the way you think. And I also love your approach to life because I'm an elder millennial and I feel like we just get, absolutely essed on by like everyone. And we have hearts. We're not all
Yes.
just like in Wall Street jobs and like tech and
Seriously, like,
yeah.
yes, did some of us have to succumb to the system? Yes, and Gen Z will realize that one day. They're gonna
Yes,
have to
totally.
succumb to the system. Do I still hate the 40-hour work week? Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm doing what I can within the system to try to give back and to try to just like, yeah, bring goodness into the world. So that's all I can do. And
Yeah.
thank
Well, and
you
I
so
also
much for saying that. I've also enjoyed this conversation.
yeah, no, and it's I feel like it's important to take a step back every once in a while and just realize that while the system has like a million glaring flaws, we've never seen the lack of a system, but we've read about it and it's really scary. So I'm like all about just like, hey, I got little kids, so do you, so you plan on them and our parents are older, like let's keep the
For sure.
system going and then fix it as much as we can and as often. So thank you. I appreciate your
Fix
approach to
it as
life.
much as we can.
Yeah. And is there anything you want to add before I let you go?
Um, nothing's coming to mind, but
That's cool.
thank you so much for this conversation. It was so nice talking to you, and thanks so much for the invite to come on and just talk about some of my opinions. I really appreciated it, and I had a really
Yeah.
nice time.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. And if people are local and they want to find you, is it okay if I put in the notes your job description and all that so they can? Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I kind of have two hats. I have my freelance that I'm still doing with Depth Dance as the artistic director, contemporary choreography, and then I have my other hat of arts coordinator for City of Tempe. So, yeah, you can plug either or both of those things. That would be That'd be great.
All right, awesome. Well, Ellen,
Cool.
thank you so much for coming on the show. To everyone listening at home, this has been our first ever video broadcast of Coffin Talk. The number one way to support the show is to head over to my website, www.mikeyop.com, and sign up for the once a week free email that has either a hilarious or not hilarious essay or nonfiction or fiction story, and a link to every week's podcast. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ellen. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been watching or listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.